Okay. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for coming. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to be part of this Congress, specifically organized by the FETA Foundation. My name is Mevludin Ibishi. I'm an associate professor at International Balkan University, and I have been obliged to moderate this session. Though I have seen the topics, but I don't know the content, and I believe so as well you. It will be an interesting position in terms of topics and themes and content. Therefore, in order to proceed, not to lose your time, I would like just to say some technical rules as they have informed me. We have around, per each presenter, 15 minutes, but we'll go with 20 because some of them is missing. So we will deliberately give some time more. And then we finish with presentations and we go with Q&As in general, okay? So the audience, you can write your questions and at the end you can pose them. So I thank you very much for your presence. The first presenter is Arxhend Blakçori with the topic politics in metaphysical or is metaphysical. Right? Okay. Yes and no. He's from Kosovo. I don't have any other information for him. So I wish you luck and success. The floor is yours, please.
So thank you. I would like to start with a kind of grateful attitude towards FETA FND organization and all other participating entities here. My topic that I would like to present is called Politics is Metaphysical, yes and no. The idea behind this topic came to me as I started to read before a couple of years ago classical thinkers, primarily Al-Ghazali, alongside with Aristotle and Plato. Viktor Frankl famously said that one of the diseases of modern time is narcissism and hedonism. Momentarily, nihilism, sense of senselessness, and lack of meaning are prevailing in our spaces of life. Therefore, I think as a young academician or an aspiring academician, one of my roles is to aspire or is to identify, examine, conceptualize, and give a practical terrain or application of such definition regarding what is politics. Is politics related with metaphysics, and should politics be ethical, or should politics proceed from metaphysics, or vice versa? As I previously said, chaos, disorder, and uncertainty are self-evident manifestation of what's inside our souls, actually. But nonetheless, what has become triumphant in the public sphere is a kind of will to power. I would like to cite here Naqib al-Atas, who basically in majority of his work mentions that Dean of Development, blind imitation of the image of kind of West scientific enterprise, raving of slogans alongside with zealous activism are one of the complementary manifestation of the state of reality today. So what I want to do or dedicate this presentation is to conceptualize, elaborate, and clarify the nature of politics and political order from Western framework of thinking and from Islamic framework of thinking. And I want to give a kind of grounded, grounded, culminated totality of these definition with both theoretical insight and practical implementation. So I already posed this question, but the main one is politics metaphysical? Are politics and metaphysics related, or are they independent fields of practical inquiry? Does complete pragmatism in politics without implied metaphysical foundation leads to a collapsed state of hedonism and nihilism? And afterward, there are really deep associated problems of tradition, modernity, liberalism, secularism. The research methodology that I use is primarily qualitative, descriptive in nature. It's observational and it's non-numerical. Although in the discussion part, I presented some studies that have empirical backup, meaning namely quantitative. So what's the Western worldview on government and politics? What are the main principled values? Actually, in the classical times, the principled values were primarily focused on basically expanding the good and forbidding the evil through virtues of prudence, temperance, courage, and wisdom. Nonetheless, after the Reformation of Christianity started, namely the division of the church from the state, a new architecture of thought emerged, which produced what's called today the state, the modern state. Basically, Thomas Jefferson, alongside founding fathers of the United States, have compiled a set of papers in a culminating document that's called Federalist Papers, and they present three first metaphysical principles that constitute a state or a society that it's manifested in the state. The first one is the right to choose the life that you want to live. The second one is liberty, and the third one is pursuit of happiness. There is a debate whether the third one is substituted or not with pursuit of property at that particular time. If we go back to Aristotle, politics is a practical science, which its main aim serves to develop or facilitate the pathway to a happy life. But he relates that with law, because according to Aristotle, it's necessary to have law so that order is produced. And order afterward leads, as a practical foundation of life, leads to happiness, which is the ultimate virtue. Unfortunately, after the Enlightenment, or before the Enlightenment, with Galileo, started a kind of mechanical reductionism of all components of life to materialism. And materialism actually today is one of the prevailing diseases of modern thinking, because we have a tendency to reduce the complexity of a system of elements in our life to basically one component, which is materialism. This framework of thinking, unfortunately, transferred as an added value, as a first principle added value to Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. There are famous debate on the state of nature. How should a society organize itself so that a form of collective unity is formed? Hobbes and Rousseau had a more negative view on that, meaning they saw that at a particular time, they saw that chaos is one of the leading factors to tragedy, to loss of life. But they could not provide a solution to that, except Locke comes and he states that we need to have a system of right, of primer liberties, which need to be embedded in constitution and in law, and then afterward they will transform the state of society as a whole. If we come to contemporary literature, one of the, let's say, Fukuyama together with Huntington They provide a more practical tonality to the discussion of what is politics, what is the state, and the interrelated elements. According to Fukuyama, in multiple books, starting from actually political order, origins of political order and decay, he defines state as a long-term struggle against family. His primary, the meaning behind such definition is that the nepotism, cronyism, and corruption as such should not be involved in institutions as elements or as signifiers of building institutions. But unfortunately, in the West, this has expanded as a kind of first principle definition, has been expanded practically in the domain of other lives, and we see momentarily a decline, be it in strength, be it in marriage as an institution, but be it in other domains of life. But Francis Fukuyama as well states that check and balances are necessary, and check and balances as a primary first principle idea and constituted theoretical definition came from founding fathers, from the Federalist Papers. So according to Fukuyama, alongside this or complementary to this is that state should be an impersonal institution. If the state becomes a personal institution, corruption as such emerges in society because there is no, the personalization of the state brings out corruption because it does not allow merit to be awarded. It does not allow personal excellency to be accommodated. So the main problem in the West, let's say the solution to the problem of too much authority in the Western chain of political thought is that there should be much focus not to the creation of authority, but to the limitation of authority through check and balances. And basically what this entails is that we don't believe that a human being as such is able by itself to control his desires so that the state collapses. So we need to have check and balances. So you have John Rawls, Nozick, and Volin, which is a contemporary strain of political thought. Rawls basically states that defines justice as a main principle of political thought, and he defines justice in that regard as fairness, as giving, or to practically coin the term, is equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, which is a basic differentiation from the term that's used in postmodernism framework of thinking. Beyond that, we have Nozick, who speaks a lot about the minimalist state. What he means by that is that a state should have a minimal role in defining and governing the life of citizens, except let's say a minimal set of rules and regulations that people, at least there is not a chaos prevailing there. Volin speaks a lot about corporate-based governance and inverted totalitarianism as new forms of emerging problems in today's circumstances. So you have here the Enlightenment vision, which is basically reason is the postulate that gives meaning to our lives, not revelation, which produces individualism and scientific enterprise. Afterward, liberalism and capitalism is produced as a result in England, United States, and France, which means freedom and wealth. And afterwards, scientific pursuit produced practically engineering and medicine, which produces material improvement in material goods and health, which basically lead again to the what's Plato called happiness as the culmination of all virtues. But happiness is replaced with progress. Let's not forget this in the Western chain of thought today, be it metaphysical or political. So here you have Fukuyama's modern development paradigm, which is economic growth produces social. Basically, everything starts from materialism. In a way, it's right, but in other ways, it's wrong because it's destroying the sense of social unity and cohesion at that regard. Economic growth produces social mobilization, which produces democracy, which produces rule of law, which produces legitimacy, and the state is as such created. You can read this in multiple ways, but I think that's the correct way. How do you read the graph? So here you have the minimal functions, intermediate functions, and activist functions of the state. Again, this is provided from Francis Fukuyama. But here as well, we can see, here I presented a graph of corruption. And you can see that the states that are less corrupted ones are Singapore, Denmark, Netherlands, United Kingdom, Germany, while the most corrupted countries in the world are Somalia, North Korea, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Kenya. Basically, when you have a violation of the principle, first metaphysical principles, you have an emergent chaos. That's what I want to stress out by the graph. And one of the, this is primarily the cause. Let's say there is a direct connection between violation of first metaphysical principles, be it corruption, be it loss of knowledge, be it loss of wisdom, be it loss of distributing the good to the wider society, and chaos, manifested chaos in such states. What is the Islamic philosophical worldview on government, governance, and politics? Al-Ghazali has a similar definition with founding fathers regarding politics. He states that state as a totality is nothing else except a mechanism that needs, through disciplined order and judicial framework, discipline the desires of its citizens. Otherwise, corruption will emerge. Namely, he said that lust, anger, and greed as one of the most, let's say, fundamental sins, both in Islamic and Christian understanding of the sins. They should be maintained, and they should be controlled so that a flourishing element is integrated within the community. Ibn Sina is much more abstract in its understanding of politics. He primarily states that the polis, the city, should be the culmination of what's called principled virtues of knowledge and truth acquisition. He adds truth acquisition, which is really important, but he states that we should follow the example of Prophet, the Medinian experience. Al-Farabi insists in instilling the tradition of truth, goodness, and beauty as a whole in politics. And he leaves pretty much left much of the practicalities regarding how to actualize this kind of theoretical framework. Again, there is a direct connection in Al-Ghazali's political thought between disciplining the desires of the individuals within the community through judicial framework and order and emergence of first principles as such. So you have we have a kind of in historically speaking in the chain of thought, but even in the practical chain of the or different or multiplex organization of life, we have a kind of transfer from theocentric worldview to anthropocentric worldview. Here you have with this graph, what I wanted to show is that you have a this is a book called From Barbarians to Bureaucrats. It's a book that explains how a set of principles can build a miracle, actually, be it in state, be it in civil society, be it in other domains of life. When you go from taqlid, from blind imitation, to building in an authentic way, to first principles that rule and govern our lives, but as well they support innovation, accommodation of knowledge, trust as such, and wisdom and justice as such. So you have from blind reliance on personalities and dogma, from barbarian to transformation into builder and explorer, which is reliance on principles and processes. And afterward, you have the synergist, and if there is a kind of downward trajectory, you fall again to the bureaucrat and aristocracy, which is basically again reliance on personalities and dogma. Okay, so there is a direct connection between flourishing, let's say political flourishing of life, and investment on knowledge as a first metaphysical principle. You see, I put this graph here because I wanted to show that there is a direct connection again between investment on knowledge and human flourishing. And human flourishing is obviously one of the first defining scopes of a government, of a political authority, be it in local or national terms. You have Norway, New Zealand, United Kingdom, United States, Canada, France, which invest the most in education as a share of GDP. And you have flourishing in these countries because the best countries to live in the world momentarily are basically Nordic countries, accompanied from I think Singapore, Japan, Germany, New Zealand. I showed here again a graph in corruption. The least corrupt countries in the world are Denmark, New Zealand, Finland, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland. And basically the antidote to corruption is responsibility. But definition of responsibility is one of the definitions of wisdom as well, which is to put right people in the right places, which means to accommodate knowledge in institutions, but not only to accommodate knowledge in a hierarchical order within institutions and society as such. The most corrupt countries are North Korea, Yemen, South Sudan, Syria, and Somalia.
Dear Arxhend, you have finished 20 minutes. Could you summarize in 3 minutes extra?
Yes. So there is since now I'm on the empirical part. There is a future growth estimate which is produced from Ray Dalio, which basically states that again, if you invest on value, you will reward value. So if the first parameter or indicator of a successfully effective society and state is investment in education, which leads to labor productivity, which leads to incentivizing hard work, which leads to incentivizing investment. This follows up with creation of a culture which appreciates lives, appreciate achievement, and as a such states emerge, a successful state actually, which leads to bureaucracy, effective bureaucracy, diminished corruption, and established rule of law. I would like to kind of conclude with this. In 1963, the Prime Minister of Singapore met with the President of Jamaica. President of Jamaica stated that we will invest on infrastructure and tourism. The Prime Minister of Singapore said that no, we will invest on human capital. In 1963, GDP per capita in Jamaica was $2,000. Same or likewise in Singapore. 2020, Singapore GDP per capita is $64,000. Jamaica is $4,000. And there is a study that I would recommend you to read. This is from Milken Institute. If you want the link, I can follow up and forward it afterwards. So here are the references. Thank you for your attention. Pardon me for extending it.
Okay, Arxhend, thank you very much for your presentation. You might seat now, and questions will come later on. Though I would go with a topic like, is politics metaphysical, yes or no? I believe people will have their questions. So now we proceed with the next presenter, Katarzyna Wasiak. Maybe the pronunciation as well of your name? Okay. Post-memory, how the next generation remembers the war. The floor is yours, 20 minutes. Yeah, good.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad I'm here. Not just because I really wanted to be a participant of this Congress, but I really wanted to come once again to Skopje because this is a beautiful city. And okay, I will start with my topic, post-memory, how does the second generation remember the war? My case study is Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I was inspired by a research of Marina Hirsch. She created the concept of post-memory, and I decided to also took it to my research. And actually, this is a subject of my research. And Marina Hirsch placed the category of post-memory in the context of the Holocaust, based on her own experience, because she was born after the Second War in the Jewish family, the survivors of Holocaust, and she created an innovative theory of research on the memory of the second generation. The so-called after generation. In starting from the autobiographical experience, which she presented in her 1997 book, Family Frames, Photography, Narrative, and Post-Memory, here she analyzed her memories of the Second War, which she adapted from through the socialization from photographs surrounding her, personal stories, diaries, etc. And the author was unusually inspired by Art Spiegelman, who created the controversial comic book Maus a Survivor's Tale. And the author of the comic, Spiegelman, tells the story of his father, who was a Holocaust survivor. And the father paid for its significant changes in his cycle, which then had an impact on his loved ones. Hirsch noted that Spiegelman links the past and the present, and highlighting the transformation of the survivor's experience to the next generation. And Hirsch considered the post-memory as the memory of the second generation of the community affected by traumatic experience, as I said, so-called after generation. And she took as a basic element of the category of trauma and its transmission to the next generation. And over the next year, she, in many essays and following book, the researchers Hirsch made the issue of post-memory more precisely. She claiming that post-memory is distinguished from memory by a generational gap and history by a deep personal bond. Post-memory is a strong and very special form of memory precisely because its relation to an object or a sources is mediated not by memories but by imagination and creativity. And post-memory characterizes the experience of those who have grown in a society dominated by narrative arising before their birth. And the later histories are abolished by the histories of the previous generation, shaped by a traumatic experience that cannot be understood or perceived. And post-memory, right, Hirsch is not a movement, a method, or an idea, but a structure for the inner and transgenerational transmission of a traumatic knowledge and experience. Given the personal nature of post-memory, it can be considered as a kind of individual memory. However, when the whole community is a bearer of the experience of suffering. It's not easy to escape from the other narratives. In other words, the individual memory make up the collective memory. And collective memory gives it its proper context. Additionally, it should be noted that, once again, that Marina Hirsch actually considered trauma as a constitutive element of post-memory. And the experience of war trauma are perceived as a dark, full of pain and suffering. It's a suffering experience. And this is because they refer to a fragment of history that is deeply rooted in the community's perception as a painful event. And family narratives are part of personal biography. We are immersed into family stories from the very beginning, and those stories give us a knowledge about the world, and consequently we interpret the world and experience through their prism, and then assemble them into a coherent unit. Our actual being is connected to the family stories, and those stories are part of our biography. And post-memory in Bosnia and Herzegovina is a current phenomenon, but not comparable to post-memory of Holocaust survivors. In Bosnia, we clash with some kind of nostalgia for your parents' youth, while in the case of the second generation of Holocaust survivors, we are immediately confronted with the trauma of war. In the case of the memories of the Bosniaks, we are confronted with the, let's say, like some kind of positive phase of war, positive phase of the time of conflict, because during my research I've done in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I noticed that when I was asking my respondents about war, about family and war, during their life during the conflict, they didn't focus on crimes, harm, or suffering, but that had befallen either family members or like entire community. But they was talking about family and their lives during the war, about how their parents met, how they were studying, how they were partying, how they used to be during the conflict. As has already been pointed out, the memory of ancestors is a part of our history, and this is why stories about their lives during the war are so important. And this is worth actually asking ourselves, what did we ask our parents about? What parts of the story were most important for us, and probably those that actually concern getting to know them. And our stories begin with them, with how they met, how they get married. This is an extremely important moment for our personal biography. And as Patrick Modiano said, our memory precedes our birth. And of course, trauma has certainly been passed on in some way, but it manifests itself in the fear of another conflict and the desire to escape country, and not in hatred for the nation that built Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the mood of nationalism that persists in Bosnia and Herzegovina has been developed by the historical narrative and politics, then by memories of parents. And antagonism between nations, it's evident, but it was not developed by one particular group. It is an aftermath of the long-standing ethnic relation and the propaganda of individual ethnic groups that influence public sentiment. Thank you.
Okay. Katarzyna, thank you very much for your presentation. So we proceed with the third the last but not the least presenter, Nikola Lero, Slipping into Failure, Bosnian Multiculturalism since Yugoslavia, through Sejdić and Finci, under Žižek. Is it the case, Sejdić and Finci, the case study in European court? Okay, very good.
Just a part.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Hi, I hope you can hear me well. There's a small echo, but whatever. So I'm Nikola Lero, I come from Bosnia, but actually this was written while I was at the University of Stavanger in Norway, when I became interested in the questions of multiculturalism as an ideology. So this is a small case study, but I hope we will escape the methodological nationalism and not just study Bosnia or Macedonia or Poland or whatever, but have some findings that are useful out of the context of the nation state. So what's happening in Bosnia? Many things. Here we have the crisis of the Bosnian multiculturalism. In 2001, Wolfgang Petric, the former representative of international community, wrote an article titled, "Yes, Multi-Ethnic Bosnia." The title starts with this sentence, "Something strange is going on." And I think this sentence, that something strange is going on, is really a nice illustration of complicated situation in post-war Bosnia, because we had three groups who were in major conflict, which was paused. So the Dayton Agreement paused the conflict, did not end it. So the international community tried to fix the inter-ethnic hatred with so-called multi-ethnic coexistence. However, it didn't work. So minorities and position of minorities in Bosnia did not improve since the Dayton. And it seems that multicultural Bosnia is just a myth, a dream. The case of Sejdić and Finci, members of Jewish and Roma community, who sued Bosnia and Herzegovina in front of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg and won, of course, stated the ethnic and racial discrimination of Bosnia toward all minorities. But my question here is not why multiculturalism failed, but why it is failing and why, unfortunately, in Bosnia, it will not be achieved in the future. Here I have to, unfortunately, reflect on theory a bit, because concepts like ethnic groups, nations, and nationalism and multiculturalism are the so-called slippery terms that we in the Balkans use when we find it, let's say, applicable or useful to us politically. And as Michal Ignatiev in his The Balkan Tragedy already during the war said, it is clear that in the Balkans we have the narratives of big ethnic groups, great Serbs, great Albanians, Macedonians, or whatever. Everyone is great nation. But actually, as Freud says, that is just a narcissism of minor differences that we look among us. And then we have this illusion of nations fueled by nationalism as an ideology to create a homogeneous nation state. So these are some things to have in mind when we talk about not just Bosnia, but almost every country in the Balkans. And of course, multiculturalism, which became a cliche, by the politicians to use, but actually it's quite relevant. And I frame it here relying on Canadian scholar Will Kimlicka as a process to achieve ethnic and racial equality. That is the goal in multi-ethnic community in Bosnia, in Albania, in Canada, or whatever. And there are two conditions for that to happen. We need to have secure and safe environment, and we have human rights protection. So how to understand Meta-Bosnia and why Meta-Bosnia? Robert Kaplan in his Reader's Guide to the Balkans says that the key word for understanding the Balkans is process. So process of history and process of memory. This is direct quote. So how to understand Bosnia is not to start from 1992. How to understand Macedonia is not to start since the independence, but to go way back and see which processes created the meta-state, the state that is now but affected by the melange of historical happenings. So we need to go back to history. Of course, history of Bosnia is first history of assimilation and occupation, not just Bosnia, but let's use it as an example in the Balkans, torn apart between East and West. And since its semi-independence in the 10th century, the Kingdom of Serbia and Kingdom of Croatia also started to tackle, to have aggression, to occupy Bosnia. This is 10th century, just to remind you. Then we have the Ottomans who came and ruled for over 4 centuries with mass assimilation and systematic assimilation over several centuries, and completely changed the dynamics of Bosnia, which it was before. And of course, we have Austro-Hungarians who colonized, and I will use the term colonized Bosnia in the 19th century. So we have a history of assimilation, of occupation. Then we have Bosnia as part of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, Kingdom of Yugoslavia, etc. So there is no multiculturality in that. The first multiculturality or multiculturalism that we can talk about is Yugoslavia. I will be very brief here. Many scholars praise Yugoslavia, narod and narodnosti, peoples and whatever, and bratstvo, jedinstvo, brotherhood and unity. And really, maybe in theory, Yugoslavia was a multicultural state, but in practice, as Tibor Varadi, the CEU professor, says, exactly these roots of conflict were deeply hidden in dynamics of Bosnian society, and the war happened. So this is the issue. Of course, the war happened, 100,000 people dead, 2 million displaced, and it created what Sarajevo professor calls ethnopolis. But ethnopolis is not just Bosnia. I think almost every state in the Balkans is ethnopolis, where the membership to an ethnic group is more important than a membership or being a citizen in the state. So, and then what happened in Bosnia? We have 3 constituent people and the others. We have Serbs, Bosniaks, Croats, and everybody talks about them. But they are not the only citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this is what I called the triadic majority. So there is no majority in Bosnia, but they are the triadic majority, Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks. So-called constituent people, which means nothing. This is, imagine the category of special ethnic groups to protect them. And then we have the others. The others are everyone who are not Serbs, Bosniaks, and Croats. So everyone, literally, every minority, they are defined in the constitution as the others. Defined as the others. And also it affects their political rights, because in order to, have the peace in Bosnia, they said, okay, we will give the rights to Serbs, Bosniak, and Croats, and that's peace, right? But what about other people? So we will discriminate them. So Roma people, Jewish people, Macedonians, whatever, they cannot run for presidency, for the parliament, etc. And of course, Bosnia lost multiple cases in Strasbourg, and it's clear that we have ethnic and racial discrimination, but nothing happened. This is the thing. We have rulings that were never implemented. Now we are coming to the main question. So we have a state that discriminates. We have a multiculturalism that is failing. We have minorities that are being discriminated, that cannot run for the presidency. And even the representatives of Jews and Roma or minorities like, okay, change the constitution and everything will be fixed. The scholars are also like, let's implement the ruling, it will be fixed, we will have multicultural state. But Bosnia will not be Canada, I'm sorry. And the reason is exactly in issues of multi-ethnic tolerance and so-called suživot. Suživot is coexistence in Bosnia. So what is the problem? The problem is ideological, and Slavoj Žižek, in his critique of tolerance, clearly stated that we cannot say, and I will now make a quote, we cannot say that it is enough to live in our culture and you live in your culture, and all we need is some space to tolerate each other. So what is the issue here? We have superficial ideologies of tolerance, of coexistence, which means let's live together but not really interact together. And we will have peace in Bosnia, in Macedonia, whatever post-conflict country. Now I will give a quote by Žižek. So it goes, we tolerate the other insofar as it is not the real other, but the aseptic other of pre-modern ecological wisdom, fascinating, right, and so on. The moment one is dealing with the real other, tolerance stops. What does it mean? This means when we meet someone who is not from our ethnic group, or when we give the rights to the minorities, for example, Albanian minority or Jewish minority in Bosnia, that will not fix the problem. Why it will not fix the problem? Because the moment when we actually experience them, when we live with them, when we work with them, pejorative term that I'm using, with the other, the ideological other becomes what? First the constitutional other and then the real other. You know, and I will give example of Roma, and everyone is preaching, okay, let's educate Roma, blah, blah, blah. But I remember, especially in Bosnia, who wants to go to school with Roma children, then they're excluded, segregated, they don't get the jobs. So this becomes an issue because the other is the real category. It's not just ideological. And then, of course, we have everyday discrimination. And here I reflect the concept of contact zone. And this is a contact zone, this space that we are now, where people from different groups interact. So how do we interact? Who is included? This is important. And here I want to reflect that in Bosnia, everyone talks about politics, while actually we have hundreds and thousands of crimes that are not reported against Roma, against Jew, against every minority. And people are super focused on Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks and thinking, will war happen again, and blah, blah, blah. While in reality, the lives of citizens of Bosnia are not becoming better. And finally, I really need to reflect on the quote by Žižek in Living in the End Times, where he poses the main question. So why are the problems today perceived as problems of intolerance rather than as problems of inequality, exploitation, or justice? Why is the proposed remedy tolerance rather than emancipation, political struggle, or even armed struggle? So tolerance cannot be a solution toward ethnic or inter-ethnic peace. It is a quasi-solution of superficiality where we respect each other because it is our legal, obligation to do that. And now a brief reflection to a movie Gori Vatra or Fuse, where there's a scene of a small city in post-war Bosnia, and Bill Clinton is coming and, preparations, and a representative of the Western community, referred as the supervisor or the supervisor, came to check how is the interethnic reconciliation going, is everything fine, So the local authorities brought a Bosniak and Serb in front of him to demonstrate, okay, now we are friends, etc. And the local government pushed the Bosniak and Serb okay, shake hands so the international community, Western community can see everything is great. And while they were shaking hands, Stanko, the Serb, starts yelling, "He is insane, he is doing this to me," showing the supervisor that Mugdim, the Bosniak, was flipping the middle finger during the shake. The representative, confused, asks why. The answer to this question is clear. The middle finger symbolically represents an on-the-ground response to a fabricated top-down tolerance enforced by the international community, embodied in the character of the supervisor. I will give now final conclusions. So why Bosnia will not be a peaceful, multicultural country in the future, probably recent future, right? First, we have historical geopolitical instability and fear, which goes centuries ago, and some colleagues mentioned Turks and Muslim being equalized and blah, 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 etc. Then we have legalized discrimination, then some scholars in Bosnia think will fix everything if we legally define everyone as equal. Unfortunately, life is happening on ground, and we interact on an everyday basis. So what can be done? What is the final conclusion? Nothing. Nothing can be done. Why? Because in this Bosnian ethnopolis, and I think not just Bosnian, but Balkan ethnopolis, we have ethnic groups like Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks who only think about their own ethnic-centered antagonisms, not understanding both the legal and individual other, so they cannot develop a genuine relationship with other cultures. So for changes to happen, the dual will of the leading political oligarchs and kleptocrats in Bosnia and of entire Bosnian society, which is, again, as you can see, endlessly falling into the abyss of heavily rooted group divisions, is needed. Based on the arguments in my paper, it would be highly optimistic to think that that will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikola Lero. Just in case to see whether Ilkin Aliyev is here, the fourth presenter is not here. Okay. Okay, so we have already finished, though fast. Now the floor is for the audience. You don't have to go by order. You can go with the question. Just stipulate the name of the presenter and one by one. Okay, so the floor is yours, please. Practically, you can raise your hand and then we can see your questions. Professor Aripaziti, please.
My question goes to Mr. Blakçori. It was very good to hear your presentation, even though we live in a very materialistic world, and to mention the metaphysics side by side with politics, it is very interesting. What is your opinion about the moral politics versus real politics? And do you think that Machiavellism is more important in today's world than the Avicenna's, Farabi's, or Platon's ideas on politics as ideal thing, as a constructive element of our society? And the question to Mr. from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Nikola. Yes, my question is, you mentioned that multiculturalism is an ideology. Do you think that is ideology, brainwash, etc., etc., or it is a real project for construction or building happy society, what is called by Farabi. And you said that it is impossible to positive society for all Bosniaks. That means Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats. Why you are so pessimistic? And what is the solution? Thank you very much.
He already said there is no solution, so he already stated the fact that there is no solution. He's defeatist, very bad.
So what to do? What to do with Bosnia?
So each of us, when we wake up in the morning, we have two solutions: to look to the saddest part of our lives, or to look at the brighter part of our lives. I think it's a kind of choice, but we should, when we make this choice, we should check up the facts. Nietzsche famously said that politicians use people in two ways actually, as tools or as enemies. This infamous proclamation, I think, is fatal and it's not real. I think that moral politics is applicable today, but I think as well real politics is applicable today. And I think that I need to cite Kissinger, who said that in politics you are entitled to choose not between good and evil, but between bad and worse, in the most practical term, in the most practical definition of the meaning of the term. I think that there is a combination of both. I think still, if politics is not supported, or if it does not at least partially proceeds from metaphysical principles, namely investment in education or pursuit of knowledge, forbidding evil, and commanding to good, if it does not support itself as well on wisdom, on justice, even though term justice is quite abstract, I agree. I think we need to establish peace, justice within peace. But beyond that, I think it's a combination. And I think the state of equilibrium is achieved when we combine these two, the moral politics and real politics. And I think that the gratitude today is in short of supply in many areas. Basically, even academics, I think, within the academic circles, I think there is much more critique rather than a solution to the problems. To relate to your point, but I think that again, if we look with a historical lens to the majority of problems that humanity had, we today really stand in much a let's say net positive way in many regards. I would say just there is a study conducted. It's called five global trends that every person should know. It's published from Cato Institute in the United States, and there is another book called I think it's called Factfulness. These two books demonstrate how this kind of combination of let's say investment on knowledge, investment on technology, and incentivizing of the practical application of the idea of putting right people in the right place produced enormous progress. And just to cite two short evidences from the book, from the statistical/empirical report. In 1828, extreme poverty was around 85%. Today, only 500 to 650 million people live in extreme poverty. Global GDP in 1825, it was around $650 million. In 1930, it was between 1.5 to 2.3 trillion dollars. Today, in 2020, global GDP is around $121 trillion, and the projection for 2030 is for global GDP to be around $600 trillion. At the same time, the main problems that are arising today, practically speaking, from the public policy perspective, are actually four. To relate with, again, with moral politics and real politics: climate change and the crisis of global nature, wealth inequality, technological revolution, and a potential risk of a return of a kind of tribal nationalism. So all these problems are basically moral problems. Are more wealth inequality.
I'm very sorry, but
Yeah, just I will conclude. Yeah. Wealth inequality derives from greed and gluttony. Technological revolution, in a way, it has produced a kind of utopia which needs obviously to be solved gradually. Crisis of climate change and global nature, again from gluttony, and from more gluttony for over main studies show that climate change is mainly caused, of course, by emissions of CO2 that are caused by cars, but as well by overconsumption of meat and overfishing oceans. Again, a greed/gluttony problem. And the practical solution to all these problems that I mentioned is virtue. Again, returning virtue in our minds and actions. And I think that's where I need to stop. Thank you. I think that I offered a kind of, let's say, balance or a kind of equilibrium state of approach to real politics and moral politics.
thank you.
Yeah, but the realistic politics still, again, the first principles are derived from the moral politics.
Okay, thank you. I think Professor Alipaziti, please don't give such a long questions. Okay, and I think that your debate goes more. You slip towards economic globalization. You have to debate on that. Okay, so can you proceed with your answer, please?
Okay. So the first question was, is multiculturalism an ideology? Of course. That's the answer. I mean, this is the ideology that different cultures can live harmoniously and peacefully in a society. And this is the mostly liberal ideology. While the radical multiculturalism says there has to be a clash, a cultural contact. So it is an ideology which says, okay, we are from different groups, cultural groups. Let me emphasize that. And like here, and then we together. This is an ideology. So Suživot is superficial multiculturalism. So let me explain the other part. The other part is it's a process. And it's a process where we strive toward ethnic and racial equality. Why? And then you asked, we are all working into these ideas of multicultural society, and that is the future also of all of us. What can be done? And I said nothing, and I'm not pessimistic. The first, as Boris Buden, Croatian historian, says, we need to clean the, pardon my English, shit, the history of shit from the diapers of newly born societies. So we need to clean that. The nationalism, the racism, wars and genocides. But I believe that, unfortunately, we cannot do that. So the third question was, what is the solution? The solution is to go beyond ethnic identity. And the question is, can we do it in the Balkans? So that's my answer. And yeah.
What I would add, if so, because Professor Alipaziti is a sociologist, I would say that we need to incorporate the concept of interculturalism What you're speaking of, you speak about tolerance, and it means we all together, we love each other with tolerance. But multiculturalism, I think it stipulates the fact of political integrity, what we share in politics. And that's why it's failing, not only here, in Germany as well, in many other countries, okay? In Holland and so on. So via migration, multiculturalism failed, because when a Muslim or a non-Muslim needs to cooperate in terms of political institutionalism, it becomes a kind of clash. Okay, thank you very much. Any, please?
Okay, first of all, I want to congratulate my colleagues for the very interesting topics that they choose, and I saw that there is a huge debate regarding the topics that they choose. Actually, I have a short question about the Nikola. I deal with a lot of research regarding the Bosnia and Herzegovina's historical part after the war. And I want to know from your perspective as a citizen of Bosnia and Herzegovina regarding the situation that it's in Bosnia and Herzegovina. What you think that it's the main reason? You mentioned different reason regarding the problem between the ethnic groups in Bosnia. And I want to know from your perspective, what is the main reason why these problems are caused, even that the war was ended 25 years ago? So from your perspective as a researcher and what you conduct till now, what you can, let's say, divide as a main problem that caused all this situation and the problem in Bosnia?
Okay, I can answer that. And we again go back to this mythomania of ethnic groups in the Balkans. And some processes never ended. The process of Great Serbia or whatsoever. So this is the issue. The ideology, I would say, of an ethnic group having their own territory. So this is the issue of power. And that is, I think, the main reason, this obsession to be, I would say, to protect your community from an enemy that is not even real anymore. So processes didn't end, and Dayton, as I said in the presentation, didn't end the war. It just paused it. So unfortunately, I think the processes of conflict will continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Okay, sorry. Any other question? Okay, let us finish with the audience, then you can go with... Okay, until we have, I think, because I teach Balkan politics and we are all from the Balkans, what we have to take into consideration in terms of Bosnia and Herzegovina is that Dayton Peace Accord has changed the position from a state of war to a state of peace. And in these circumstances of 5 years of continuous systematic warfare between ethnicities had made no space to think about these terms today that the Court of Human Rights sees. So in those kind of complexities, I think that the answer is in the Constitution that stipulates a right to these three ethnicities because they were, internally struggling for this situation. So the state of peace, it was much more needed rather to go into a deep debate for these ethnical, let's say, positions, please.
I will give an answer very briefly. So you said constitutional solution or political, and I actually argued that that's not going to fix it. And let's go back to Yugoslavia. We had it in Yugoslavia. Really? We had a multicultural, yes, of course, communist in a weird way, multicultural state with beautiful, beautiful constitutional rights to minorities and to many, many peoples or narodi. And then it failed. Why it failed? And then we go back to these on-ground issues. So that will not be a solution, unfortunately, but it can be a first step. So we go back in the circle of history if we do that. But I agree with you, mostly.
Okay, fine. No, I mean, the political decisions have to be legalized, and the Constitution is the legal document that you proceed. how you agree among the political entities, it's a matter of another issue. Okay.
It's something with the case of Bosnia, because in Kosovo we had a kind of similar case with the Serbian minorities, but actually their rights were accommodated through different diplomatic processes since the Vienna process from 2004 and on, up until the end of international supervision. But I think that the legal framework that was chosen to be implemented from the Western institutions in Kosovo was the type. Actually, there were three solutions that were presented in the law framework. In the international law framework that afterward was transferred to the Kosovo's constitution and other important legal documents. The first one was integration, the second one was assimilation, and the third one was a kind of isolationism, reactionary isolationism. But of course, I mean, majority of Western governments, meaning Germany and other the most important political stakeholders chose the integration pathway. I don't know how practically is functioning for Bosnia, since I know that there are three parts there, and different. It should be more complex. But for Kosovo, I think it functioned very well in that regard, that there is a state of peace established, and I don't think that that kind of state of peace can be easily demolished. Or in a kind of ad hoc manner, the state of peace between Kosovan and Serbian minorities can be dismissed or dismantled easily. But as well, I think that Žižek is wrong in many regards, not only in many philosophical issues, but as well in this thing. I think that he's wrong, because practically speaking, the framework that was instituted and practically implemented from international community is still working. It's obvious. I mean, so.
Okay, thank you very much. If we don't have other questions to proceed with, I would like to thank you to all three presenters and to the audience. And I apologize in the name of the organizers for the echo that we had on the voice issue. So thank you very much. Wish you well. And do we have any other obligation? Do we need to give the certificates? Okay. So let us proceed, please. Thank you. Well.